Today, we're covering a topic that's often overlooked but can have massive consequences. What happens to your 401k in a divorce, as well as how to protect your retirement from financial disaster. I've asked Oscar Alvarez, who is a CFP and a CDFA, to join us for this important conversation. So, welcome, Oscar.
Hi, Ned. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, he does a lot of work with divorce and just very, very knowledgeable. So let's face it, divorces are often hard and often costly. The Divorce Survival Guide can help you out. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/DSG to access it. The Divorce Survival Guide will provide insight so you don't have to worry about what you need to do. It gives you a checklist so you can make sure that you're not missing things or making costly expenses before, during, or after a divorce. So I encourage you to go download that. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/DSG to access it. Hi, I'm Annette Bau, host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast and founder of the Millionaire Insider. My mission is to help you simplify the money game so you can create a financially secure and fulfilled life without having to have a PhD or spend countless hours on your finances. You're going to learn how to think like a millionaire, stop worrying about money and wondering if your financial house is truly in order, and instead spend your time doing what you love. With over 3 decades advising 7, 8, and even 9-figure millionaires, and now joining that elite group, I'm in a unique position to help you make the best financial choices so you can create a secure financial future and retirement you love. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/132. Millionaireseries.com copyrights all materials and intellectual property. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide any investment, financial, tax, retirement planning, or healthcare advice. By accessing this content, you agree to hold millionaireseries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved. So let's dive in. If you're married, divorced, or even thinking about separating, or perhaps you're helping someone who is, this episode is for you. Let's start off, Oscar, by talking about why 401ks matter so much in a divorce.
Well, typically the 401k is one of the largest assets in a marriage. It could either be the husband's or the wife's or a combination of the two, but they're generally the bigger retirement assets that they have. The house being the biggest, the 401ks usually come in a second place. And so because it's a large part of the assets, you want to make sure that you're handling the 401k during a divorce in the proper manner to ensure you don't get any unforeseen tax issues or problems with the transfers.
Yeah, and I want to just say one thing that I have seen so many times. I don't know if you have a comment on it, is people who are like, oh, my husband got his 401k. I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute. I mean, do you see that a lot? It's just kind of like, yeah. Oh, that was his. And I'm like, wait a minute. He worked. He made more money. You stayed home with the kids. Wait a minute. Right. It's like they're not even aware of it.
And most 401ks are considered marital assets. So it actually belongs to 2 of them when you're talking about a divorce. But you got to be careful because it may not necessarily be 100% both of theirs. And there's a lot of things that one has to look at before you try to split that asset.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think it's something you got to have an expert looking at it. It's a matter of making sure you're protected. And I see so many cases where it's not. Don't let that be you. So let's talk a little bit about what is a marital asset and what's not, just so people can kind of get an idea of that.
So a marital asset is an asset that was created or added to during a marriage. So once the date of marriage, from that point forward, any contributions to or creation of any sort of investment, 401k, IRA, whatever it might be, is considered marital property. What's considered separate property, which means it's not marital, are investments or something that was started prior to the marriage. Now, what becomes tricky is let's just say I have a 401k, I'm single, I've got a 401k, I get married, and now my wife and I, we're still contributing to that same 401k that I had before I got married. Now you have an issue of some of it's separate and some of it's marital. And you have to have an expert dealing with how do you split that? Where does the split come and how much?
Yeah. And then on a side note, like if it's a community property state and you don't have a prenup and now they commingled it, it's probably all of her. It's probably, split. So again, but you got to look into that. And it really depends who has the best attorney. I mean, I'm just saying, even
Right.
though there are some very fine lines, whether it's community property or not, you still want to make sure you have a really good attorney.
Right. And adding to that community, it's just not every state treats it as community property. Some states are community property states and some are equity states. And so you
Yeah.
need to know what your state laws are and how they look at it to make sure you get a full understanding of what can possibly happen.
Yeah, good point. And obviously, it also takes into account if you have a prenup or a postnup. So you got to just be aware of all of that. And one of the things I will just say, as far as it's so important, is you got to get clear documentation of when contributions were made and understand that division. That's so important. So before we dive into that, can you just explain to people what a QDRO is? And I will also link to that in the show notes.
Okay. So a quadro, it's a qualified domestic relations order. And we refer to it as a quadro. And basically what a quadro is, it's a legal document that is created by the lawyers that allows for the transfer of assets out of a 401k or a TSP type account. You can't move that money without having the quadro. So just because somebody has a divorce decree, if there wasn't a quadro created, guess what? You're not getting that money. So you got to know what the asset is and what the requirements are to ensure that you get all that done at the proper time.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add to that is that I literally had a situation where, without giving a lot of details, even though she said I could, a woman inherited money. So she became my client. And in the process of that, she changed her name. So I said, I need all the documentation. Well, going through the documentation, I'm like, whatever happened with this quadro that she had? She goes, that's a really good question. She did not realize she had a quadro, and it was literally about 50, $60,000, maybe 70. And what was so interesting is that when they sent out the paperwork to tell her she had a quadro, it looked like a piece of marketing material. Now, she just kept everything, but you would have just thought it was one of those promotional pieces because it
Hmm.
looked just like that. What was really questionable is if she didn't take it, who got it? Because it wasn't like it was going to the ex. And so it was like basically that company was just going to have it inside there to give them a little more buffer. And I can't imagine how many times that happens. So, and
It-
unfortunately, she lost a lot of money because she didn't have it invested. It was invested there. And so it's something to be really aware of. Now, without a quadro, and I think you hit on this, you could trigger unintended taxes, penalties, and even legal complications. So you've got to make sure you have one and that then you do something with it in a timely manner. It's so important. And then don't just
right.
leave those assets. You need to get them professionally managed and get some help if you're not qualified.
Let me add
Um,
something to that as
yeah.
well. Just if you're the person that's going to receive the money from the 401k or the TSP, and you need some funds available to you on the short term because of all the turmoil, you need to make sure that's specified correctly in the quadro because you're going to get taxed on that money. But if you're under 59 and a half, you would normally have a 10% penalty on top of that. And you want to avoid that. So if you're going to need to draw money from it immediately, make that part of the quadro. So all you're doing is paying just the taxes and no penalties.
Oh, that's a great point. And I just want to reiterate when it comes to a quadro, you have to make sure that you have an expert. I have heard of ones being drafted incorrectly and it can cause all kinds of nightmares. So make sure the person you're dealing with is qualified. So, can you talk about some common mistakes that are costly that impact people?
So the probably the biggest thing I've seen is when people they do the quadro without asking the plan administrator of the 401k, whatever company it is. Every company has its own 401k document. or what we call plan administrator. And the rules are different depending on how those 401ks were set up. So the biggest problem most people have is they set up this QDRO and think that's all they got to do is just put it in the QDRO, but they didn't check with the 401k administrator. And guess what? They need something a little different. They need specific wording or some element that that specific plan administrator wants in the QDRO to ensure they can do the transfer. And guess what? If they don't have it, they got to go all the way back and get a new QDRO. So
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest mistake is not checking with the plan administrator to ensure they understand what is required in order to transfer the assets. The next biggest thing is really just what I kind of mentioned earlier. There's the transfer of the assets, which is a non-taxable event. And then there's a distribution. If you're going to distribute, it needs to be clear how much is going to be taken out so that you still got to pay taxes, but you can avoid the 10% penalty. And a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll do the QDRO, they'll move the money and say, okay, now I'm going to take the money out because I need it. And they end up not only paying the penalty, but I mean the taxes, but they also pay the penalty because they didn't think ahead of time of what they were going to need. So some planning, as I ask my clients, what do you want your post-divorce life to look like? And how much is that going to take? And I always ask them, do you think you're going to need to pull money out? And we get that done ahead of time. Plan for it ahead of time so you don't
So
have
let
any
me ask a question on
surprises.
that. So if they have it planned ahead of time that they're going to take some of the money out, not roll it all into the QDRO, do they avoid that 10% penalty?
If they planned it, they will avoid the 10% penalty.
Even if they're below 59 and a half?
Correct.
Wow. Okay, that's huge. Okay, absolutely. Anything else that you see some big mistakes that cost
Uh,
people money?
yes. The other big mistake is not putting a timeline in the divorce decree or the QDRO on when this has to happen. And I had one of my first cases, had the QDRO, had everything, and it says move the money, and it took over a year to get the money.
Wow.
Why? Because the guy, one party could stall and stall and stall, and there was no requirement, there was no deadline put in the
Mm,
divorce decree. And so I'm a big advocate for everything should have a timeline.
yeah, that's good. Well, and a couple of things I would just add is letting emotions really override. Because a lot of times, especially if you did not want the divorce, you're going to be a lot more probably angry, fearful, emotional, or if you're worried about money. And that's why you really need to make sure you've got somebody on your team, ideally a financial advisor, an attorney that's not emotionally driven, that can really think logically, because you need that when you're dealing with these kind of things or with money. And then you got to realize that whenever you're getting money that's in a qualified account, typically speaking, you're not getting dollar for dollar. Like if you're in the 30% tax rate, it's 500,000, that's 150,000 you owe the IRS. And so it's really 350. So you got to have somebody doing those numbers. And one of the biggest mistakes I see is where people do not have somebody looking at those numbers. They just go make a decision, or they say, okay, you get this investment, which is after tax. You get this one, which is pre-tax. And it's almost always the wife that has no clue. Oh, okay. Oh, good. I'm glad I got the retirement, not realizing she's just gotten a third less. And if you don't have a good attorney or a good financial advisor, it's a problem.
Yeah. I had a case where the one party had to split a brokerage account, and he ended up trying to give the other side all of the high taxable stocks. And I caught that, but people do stuff like that.
Well, and the attorney is not looking at that. I'm just
Right.
telling you, those are things that financial advisors catch. If somebody is not going through and saying every asset and what is the net value, you got the wrong advisor team. Because
Yeah.
sometimes people will say, oh, I want the house instead of retirement. Or I want this instead of that. You've got to make sure somebody's looking at it and going through all of it with you. And then I just think you have to add to that is just like what you said, but just assuming that, oh, it's a friendly divorce and oh, my spouse is taking care of me and he wants to make sure I'm okay. Well, of course he does when he's having a conversation with you right now. Long term, maybe not so much. And I always laugh and I'm like, yeah. And then a lot of times, and it can be on either side, but then it's like either the girlfriend or the boyfriend, are involved. And all of a sudden now it's like, well, I thought he cared about me. I thought he was taking care of me. And it's like, it changes a lot when other people get involved. Now, One of the things that I had in my career is I had a woman and she assumed that she was entitled to half of her ex-husband's pension and 401k, and they did not file the quadro in time. He ended up passing away and she ended up getting nothing. Now, it was a complicated situation, but it was one of the things where if you have an entitlement to that and now they remarry and now that person is the beneficiary and you don't have proper documentation, it can become a nightmare. Now, I think probably in that situation, if she would have had a better attorney, she probably would have had a chance of getting something, but it was just a nightmare. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, when I go through when I'm doing mediation, I'm very specific about like the one I'm doing now. I'm very specific about the wording of the one party will show the other party that they have not removed them from as a survivor benefit for the pension, that
Yeah,
it's still there, and then it's required by the divorce decree that they maintain that person as a survivor
yeah,
benefit,
yeah.
and it's got to be spelled out very specifically. In
Well,
fact,
and
we
if
got
you're
so detailed he needs to it's half of the pension is the general rule of thumb, and she wants all of it, so she's actually willing to pay the whatever the extra is for her to get 100%. So that's a great way to work things out, but you got to understand how to make that happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think tied to that is the fact that you aren't just having it in your document, but that the company is also notified of that. Like whether it's insurance company or it's your employer, that's critical. One of the things I just want to cover on really quickly is, divorce planning in women age 50. And there are a lot of great divorces happening and it can be devastating financially. So if that's you, you've got to make sure that you get support. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/SR, actually fill that out, and you can actually talk to Oscar, get some support. But that's something that is really critical. We don't have a lot of time to go over it, but it's something that's really important. And the only other thing I'll say on that is if you've been married for 10 or more years, you are entitled to half of your husband's Social Security if his is greater than yours. So that's important. Let's talk about working together versus going to war. Do you have any tips of what people can do so it doesn't escalate into a full-blown fight?
Well, the biggest tip I always tell people is a monetary tip. You can both cough up $10,000 to $20,000 in retainers, each of you, or you can find a mediator and maybe only at the end of the day pay $10,000 or $12,000 for mediation, and you get all the same stuff worked out, but you're working together amicably, hopefully, and you save a lot of money. You end up, the result is exactly the same, and you haven't spent that much money, and
Yeah.
hopefully it hasn't been ugly.
Yeah. And I would just say, in addition to that, always be working with a financial planner. Now, you're a CDFA. I'm not, but I will say this much. The amount of money you pay to have a qualified advisor is critical. It's worth every penny. They catch things that no one catches. And whenever I see major mistakes, they have never had a financial advisor. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't cases where somebody's had a financial advisor and it's not been the right one. But if you get one that's qualified, you're going to be 10 times better off. Let's talk for 1 minute about a couple tips as far as rebuilding the financial life after the divorce. And do you have anything to comment on that or any insight?
Well, for the clients that I work with, either I'm one side or I'm in financial neutral. What I try to do is make sure they have a clear understanding of what their income is going to look like post divorce.
Mhm.
So we look at everything, and it just depending on where they are in life, was Social Security there or not there. But we look at everything. We look at pensions, and if there's going to be any kind of support, we try to get a pretty good idea of what that's going to look like once everybody's agreed to things. And from that point, we can then plan, okay, well, based on this income, this is what you can or cannot do. And the biggest thing I see most of the time is if usually it's the wife who wants to keep the house. And when we go through the numbers, most of the time they can't afford to keep the house.
Yeah.
And so that becomes now that changes the entire program of what we're trying to split, because now we have to sell the house. And what does that mean down the road for each of them? Now they both have to acquire a house or some sort of residence. And what is that going to cost them? And so those are probably the biggest thing I've seen is understanding what you can afford and what you can't.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I also think looking at it, having a comprehensive plan so you see your bigger picture and you don't let things fall through the cracks, looking at like long-term care, if disability is important, life insurance, some of those risk managements, as well as clearly your retirement. So I think that's really important. Now, I think one of the things I would just encourage people, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming, just take one step at a time. And probably the most important thing is if you're considering a divorce, I would encourage you to talk to Oscar, have a conversation with a qualified advisor, probably an advisor over an attorney personally, because I think an advisor is going to be looking more from the money and then getting a plan and then getting your attorney. So I just think that's important. Now, if you're already divorced, I mean, a couple of things I just want to comment on is looking at Social Security if you are entitled to getting half of your exes. If they've passed away, you still may be able to get some survivor benefits. And then obviously making sure that QDRO is executed properly if you don't even know if it was. And then really making sure you have a plan. Do you have anything else to add to that or any other considerations?
Yeah. Consider it like Social Security, even though you're entitled to your ex-spouse's Social Security, and there's a few different rules, but just generally speaking, it's one of those things where I've had clients say, well, look, why don't you go ahead and take yours and then save the spousal benefit for later because it's going to be bigger, or vice versa. I have one client who she's going to take the spousal benefit as soon as he takes his, and then she'll let hers keep growing till age 70, and it'll be a bigger pot. And so there's just different strategies for Social Security. So I'm not going to get this complicated because it will get complicated, but think about that in terms of don't be ready to turn one on or the other without talking to somebody who can do that analysis for you.
Yeah, that is so important. Oh my God, I can't stress that because there are times, I mean, literally, when I did an interview with another advisor and she did the analysis of somebody's Social Security, and he literally would have been giving up like $500,000 if he would have done what he was thinking about doing versus the plan they came up with. Right. So don't let that be you. Now, some other considerations, tax implications. You got to have somebody that's knowledgeable on taxes. If there is debt, how are you going to handle that? And then as well as just the transfer of beneficiary designations. Some assets transfer via title, some beneficiary designation. And the problem is, like I've had clients who have divorce decrees that have to have life insurance on for themselves, for their ex, and then they're going and trying to change it. And if they have not had a good attorney that's gone in there and said, you can't change it, they try to do it. I'm like, wait a minute, you've got a court order. Now, what ends up happening is typically it slides. So let's say it's $1 million or $2 million, and then it's down to $1 million, then it's down to 500,000. They get to 250. Now, granted, they're leaving it to someone else. They're still going to be responsible for that. So, just be aware of those things. And if it's you, make sure you have it set up properly. You do not want to find out after the fact, after he's died and that asset has been paid out to the current wife, and now you're trying to get money. It can be a nightmare. Don't let that be you. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Oscar?
Just really finding a CDFA will help you tremendously because they understand more of the ins and outs. As a CFP, I've learned so much more through the CDFA program that I would have never thought of. So it's, even though you may have a good financial advisor in a CFP, there's still going to be things that they are not aware of. So hiring a CDFA for the duration of the process would be highly, highly advisable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In conclusion, as far as getting divorced, it does not have to ruin your retirement. You got to be proactive. Know your rights, protect your retirement assets with a QDRO, build a new plan with clear, informed decisions, and then most importantly, know you're not alone. You can get help. You don't have to go this alone. I think when you really make creating a plan for yourself and your family's future, that's really critical. Now, again, if you need support, please go to themillionairinsider.com/support-request, or you can go to themillionairinsider.com/Oscar Alvarez. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I know this is kind of a tough topic, and some of you, your head is probably spinning. If you need to go re-listen, and more importantly, get the support you need. I'm Annette Ba'u. All international copyrights are reserved. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.